Hello, everybody, either watching us or listening to us. I'm so grateful and honored to have Dr. Amber Gray today. Thank you for taking this precious time with me and with the audience. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really excited.
Well, it's a pleasure. And before we explore all the topics that I wanted to offer you today, maybe we could start with like a somatic movement, breathing, whatever practice that you want to share with us.
Yes, I think that's actually my favorite way to begin because no matter where we start, we've always had to get there. And, I don't know what everyone's morning or afternoon or evening has been like, but it's always helpful to just kind of land and notice that we're in these amazing bodies that we live in or that we are. So I'm going to invite us to do a practice called balanced breathing. And it's a practice I'll teach I'll teach the simple form and share a little bit about how it can be elaborated in self-practice. So what I'm going to invite everyone to do, wherever you are, is just take a moment to notice your physical comfort. Your physical comfort, and just can be so, I call this a micro empowerment in the work that I do. It can be so important and powerful just to be like, oh, I need a cushion behind my back because I'm a little sore, or here I am again, one of my butt cheeks is not dropping into the chair, it's hovering. Maybe I need to just let it go a bit. So there can be external things that increase our comfort or internal things. Just take a moment to do that and invite a little more physical comfort. We'll be here a few minutes. And then I'm going to invite you to take what I call a baseline of your breath. So a baseline is very simply a moment to notice. This is how I'm breathing now. It can be this is how I'm anything now, sitting, walking. But today we'll work with breathing. So just notice how you're breathing now as a baseline, a beginning point. You might notice the rhythm or pace, the location, the journey of your breath, if it's shallow or deep, whatever you're drawn to. Comfortable, uncomfortable. Noticing breath might invite you to shift even more towards more physical comfort. Sometimes we go, oh, I need to do this, and I'll be a little more comfortable. And so once you have a sense of your breath, we're going to get more specific with that baseline. And again, a baseline is a beginning point, so we'll be comparing to it. And one thing that I want to say, because my work is with trauma, is there's never a demand for change. So we do the baseline so we can see if there is change, because we're usually interested in change when we engage in these practices. But it's also important that we know that there's no demand. Our body has its own sense of timing. So honoring that is important. That's how we embody justice. So however your breath is now, in general, I'm going to invite you to more specifically notice your inhale. The in breath. Focus your attention on that. And very specifically, once you get acquainted with your in breath, what I'm going to invite you to notice as a more focused baseline is when you inhale, how far down your front does your breath go? So obviously your breath is, we're breathing it into our body. And you can sort of feel this lift of the sternum, and it feels like the breath is going in. So just notice, does it go to the top of your sternum or the middle? If you're watching me, I'm tracking with my hands. You don't have to do that. I'm just doing that to show what I'm doing. And just for the next several breaths, inhaling and seeing how far in, if you could touch it on the front of your body, how far down into your body does your inhale go? Do that a few times and then let it go, and just pause and then rest. Pauses are as, if not more important than what we do or act, especially in this busy world we're in. It's reflection time, and resting is really important for integration. So we know that new experiences can change our brain, right? Promote new pathways, but that doesn't actually happen until we rest. Now we're going to play with balancing our breathing by expanding the inhale a little, and then we're going to do the same with the exhale. And then go back and check our breath. That original baseline of our breath is spiritual comfort. So we're working with the body, so we're working with physical comfort. Just lovingly invite yourself, or repetitive, you can challenge yourself to actually bring your inhale a little deeper into your body. So that, again, if you're tracing it on the front, if it went to the middle of your sternum, can you actually bring it down farther? Just challenge yourself. If that is not comfortable, if it doesn't work, if it's scary, let it go. Let it go. Go back to unusual breathing. Just introducing it today. What we can do, and again, do we feel our ability to rise up, to uprise, and sound that expansive energy? We can just downwards. So just notice that. Just a couple more breaths. Just pause and rest. You might notice if your inhale feels a little different after that. Timing. If there's no change, that's perfectly okay. If there is change, how does it feel? Sometimes it feels like an improvement or a helpful shift. Sometimes it doesn't feel so good, right? The journey is not a straight line. So now I'm going to invite you to bring your attention to your exhale. Just find that exhale, the out breath, the letting go, right? The parasympathetic. The inhale was the sympathetic adrenal. This is the parasympathetic. And what the body actually can do and has a tendency to do on the exhale is you keep noticing how comfortable, how familiar, how much ease there is in your exhale for the next few breaths. Notice if you can sense it in your back. Wilhelm Reich called the inhale a front of the body experience, which we just played with. The exhale is back of the body. So what we can actually look for is when I exhale, does the back of my body kind of melt? I call it blobulate. If you know what a blob is, like on the exhale, our back body can actually melt. If you're in a chair that has a back, you might get a little feedback if that's happening or not. If not, just notice the capacity of your exhale to kind of melt, deconstruct, deform your back body. Again, if it's not comfortable, let it go. Do that a few more times. We're just taking a baseline now and then pause and rest. Just be with your own breathing after checking out your exhale and that very specific expression of your exhale. And then when you're ready, I'm going to invite you for several breaths. Again, it could be 3. It might be not comfortable, so you decide not to do it. You know, sometimes up to 7, 8 breaths. Every time you exhale, see if you can invite your body to melt, dissolve, blobulate a little bit more. So if you have a chair, and in the future, you know, I sometimes do this standing against a wall and like start doing wall dancing and melting. You can melt in a chair, but just see every exhale, can I actually invite more of that softening, melting? What happens to the rest of my body as I do that? What happens to my sits bones? My pelvic floor, I'm sitting. Do I become more acquainted with the chair, the couch, the stool, the cushion, the floor, or less acquainted? As many breaths as is comfortable. I'll just invite you to do 2 or 3 more breaths like this. And again, to imagine the potential. This is a practice that in the future you can actually take where you go back and forth more between the inhale and the exhale, rising up, melting down. I often take it into a dance. Do a few more of these and then pause and rest. Check in with that exhale again, the specific baseline of just noticing now when I'm just breathing. Am I more aware of that exhale in my back body and that softening quality? Down, how long, down the front bodies, inhale. How's the balance? And how is my breathing in general? That original inquiry. Them or the and how it may or may not. So I go through the facts. I find I have to do it quickly. Not that everything needs to be quick. Our society tends to promote much too much quickness, but it can be a quick on the spot, like, okay, and it can be really fun to elaborate. So yeah, I invite everyone to what you're doing, Elisa, just see if there's any stretching or movement that wants to arise from that.
I'm just so curious about what anyone felt and if they are willing to contact me and tell me. But during the practice, I had like a Medusa image because I'm in love with Medusas, I guess. But like this idea of like coming forward and then relaxing back and then again and just like floating kind of in my own flesh and bones. It felt very relaxing and soothing. So yeah, appreciate it. And I have, you know, like a chair with a support behind me, so it facilitated as well. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, thank you so much. I'm curious about the micro empowerment that you touched on at the very beginning, and if you want to share maybe a little bit more.
Absolutely. It's a term that it's part of you know, the work that I like to say, the work that we do. So the we is my clients and my students and I don't want to make it an I. I've named our work, several things over the years, just because things need a name, right? It's like, so restorative movement psychotherapy is what I first called it. And then it became, through years of mentoring with Steve Porges, polyvagal informed somatic and dance movement therapy, actually back in 2016. So it was, that's a term, polyvagal informed, has become quite popular, but this is the origins of that term, actually, is this work. And I started to just, I guess I play with words, but everything that I teach in that framework, which is a co-creation, it wouldn't exist without my client's courage, first and foremost, or my mentor, Dr. Porges, or my medicine teachers, my spiritual teachers. So it's a synthesis of that. And my clients are all survivors of political violence, war, genocide, torture. I've worked with combat veterans and civilians, refugees fleeing war. I've worked with in many indigenous communities, long-term oppression, genocide. So disempowering, right? Disempowerment is I would say that's a defining feature of racial trauma, oppression, ancestral trauma, intergenerational, interpersonal trauma, probably many traumas, or many classifications now, because we are now classifying trauma. And I was, the thing that I'm most interested in, again, I'm a therapist, and automatically, and we were talking about this before we started recording, right, is there's this, the teacher or the therapist or the doctor is here. And if that is not tended to carefully, if that is not paid attention to, and if it's blatantly exploited, it can continue, it can perpetuate more disempowerment. I'm very interested in empowering my clients. My work, whether I'm in an individual session or working out in the field with 200 people post-conflict, is writing the power differential. I don't know. I mean, it's an intention. There's a lot of work to do that in the world in general. So micro empowerments, what I noticed, what my clients taught me, this is what they taught me, is that their ability, their capacity to shift towards physical comfort, and I'm intentional with that. Shifting towards comfort is kind of a broad statement, and I just need to name that there are times where some of us need to sit with the discomfort, right? That's part of what we're learning in terms of racial, social equity today. But for my clients whose bodies have tremendous grace and resilience, and at times feel like minefields, they don't know how to navigate their own bodies anymore. The simple act, I learned that inviting them, I can't remember the first time that I did it. I was about to do a practice with uncomfortable. I just said, would you like a pillow? I remember propping her and she said, oh, and I watched her whole body. She said, I feel so much more comfortable. So shifting towards physical comfort is a micro empowerment. If we feel a little bit better in our body, and this is neuroception, right? Neuroception is that term coined by Dr. Porges' polyvagal theory, that is that subcortical, subconscious. We don't do it. It guides us, right? I don't want to say it does us, it moves us, seeking safety, scanning for danger. When we have more ease and comfort in our body, crave also maybe a little more accurately, or for truly are. I mean, that's what I mean by micro empowerment.
I'm just changing the room, but I really appreciate that. I kind of have the idea of from micro to macro, kind of like even in the physical body, we can readjust and reinvent the way we are and we feel, and really reclaim the power. Like, hey, no, I'm not feeling good right now with this sensation, so I'm just moving. Like, I'm not feeling comfortable because the connection is low. Well, I'm choosing to change the room, even though it may not feel comfortable, but that's a choice of mine. And we can start from there and then kind of widen it or open it even larger into the society as well, into
Absolutely.
relationship, interpersonal relationships, or as well in yoga settings or therapy settings as well, and kind of
Yeah.
maybe knowing ourselves more and weaving this trust with ourselves,
Yeah.
because we've met the comfort and the discomfort
Yeah.
first in ourselves. And
Yeah.
it's kind of a roadmap. Like, I don't know if it sounds
Yeah.
familiar to you, but I have this
Yeah.
image sometimes like, oh yeah, I know my shoulder like that. I know that if I go there, it feels good, like in a stretch, for example, or if I go there, it doesn't feel good. Then I have the choice again, because I have the knowledge and the experience and the embodied, to use a fancy word as well, famous well right now. But yeah, I have the knowledge and the self-understanding. So
Yeah.
that's beautiful, and I'm just so glad and hopeful that it can be as tiny as, well, as tiny, I'm not sure, but as short as observing oneself and
Mhm.
ourselves. Mm,
Yeah. Well,
mm,
it begins there. I mean,
yeah.
yes, it can be that. I mean, I believe in, tiny moments, tiny sparks,
Mm,
tiny,
yeah.
glimmers that we see in people.
Yeah.
But, most of my clients have survived
Mm,
torture and, very egregious human rights abuses. And so, therapy and dance movement therapy and just the world. I mean, and I think especially now there's such an emphasis on, oh, I'm going to take this course and become an expert. People are like, and I think some of what happened in the pandemic is all this, everything online where you're not really present with people, but
mm,
everything's getting faster and quicker.
yeah.
Um, and there's a tendency to promote, bigger, like, and also evidence-based practice, what's happening with mental health in many places, like you've got to prove, changes in these like big, um, whether it's symptoms, diagnoses, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I always say that the miracle, the power of a single breath in someone
Mm,
who hasn't been able to comfortably breathe, hasn't slept, wakes
mm,
himself up doing this. That's why I use the term micro empowerment. It
yeah.
can be, it's so powerful
Mm,
to find a few moments of ease or comfort. And I'll just say I choose those words intentionally. So it's worked for most people.
yeah.
I go between ease and comfort. What I don't use very intentionally is safety, because,
Mm,
the safety is talked about a lot in a lot of somatic frameworks.
yeah.
And there's, to me, an arrogance in that. And it comes from the
Mm,
colonization of
mm,
psychotherapy and a lot of somatics.
yeah.
I like to say relative safety. That was Angwin St.
Mm,
Just term, as safe as can be. We might be able to create a lot of or co-create a lot of relative safety in our studio or our office, but what happens when people go back out into the world where there's a lot of prejudice, or
mm,
there's somebody at home who's a perpetrator, or we're not there at night when the nightmares start. So
mm,
I'm very cognizant of that, and I'm very careful
mm,
about using that term.
mm. Yeah, I think it's like kind of too easy to say
Yeah,
like, yeah, now you've learned to regulate yourself and that's it. You're safe and you're good to go.
yeah, yeah,
Well, you're good to go in the office or the studio, as you said,
yeah,
but out in the world as well, how do they do that, and how do they come kind of become or re-become autonomous in the management of their emotion, well, management I'm not sure, but in the feeling of their emotions, but also
yeah,
not ignoring the reality of the fact that oppression and trauma and racism and many other political difficulties and things that are not okay still happen every single day
yeah,
in every and any country in the world. So that's also, yeah, kind of too easy, like think positive and good vibes only and you'll be okay, beautiful, like, well, not that much. Like, it can be useful and it's needed and required to have like self-care practices, and yet it may not be enough in times that it's really really dangerous for you to be in any circumstances. So yeah, I appreciate that
yeah,
reminder. Yeah, it's
yeah,
more realistic to me to hear that as well, especially
yeah,
with you working with such a tremendous amount of terror and real tangible danger in the people that you can just work with, and it's palpable. It's not just the imagination and the trauma time. It's really right now. So yeah, that's very very precious. Mm. And I was curious, you touched on the fact that maybe even more since COVID, that it's so easy to have access to trainings and workshops and to become an expert of we don't even know what. And I have this tendency in myself, I'm like, I want to know everything. I want to become like a trauma-informed thing and a blah, blah. And I'm just like, well, slow down. Like, where does it come from? And what do you really want to do? And who do you want to work with as well? I guess it's a great question to ask ourselves. And I'm curious about you and your journey. And you write on your website as well that you are either both artist, therapist, and academic. And so you've studied quite a lot. And I'm curious about what you focused on your thesis, for example, or your master's, or if there is anything that you want to share about that.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that, it's I'm going to name the privilege of being able to continue to seek education. I mean, I love learning, and I think learning is so important. Like, in the society that I have been raised in, it was sort of like, well, you finish high school and you go to college and then get a job. I mean, now I think people have to go all the way through to a PhD. I think it's changed, but there was sort of this linear vertical timeline, and we're always like, learning is so enriching. I think it keeps us younger, keeps us connected. I don't think the world or life is a straight line. And at least in the United States and in many other countries, actually, education is more accessible. I mean, ours is just ridiculously inaccessible. But I've been very blessed and had, parents, they're no longer here, but who were also very supportive of me continue. Like, they didn't push me to just do one, degree. They couldn't afford to pay for it. So I always worked after college. I had to work to support the degrees, but they didn't say, you've got to find a career. So I've done a lot of different things. And so I started with international relations. That was my college degree, which was a reflection of my interest in international work, and went into public health. And that was very much, I didn't have to do a thesis or anything, but I was very interested then. It was kind of anti-medicine, because the American Medical Association has so much power in the United States, and big pharma, the drug companies. And I really believe in health for all. I mean, I think it's a basic human right. So I chose public health and international nutrition and to work in that field, and did for a while, and then quickly realized I wanted to balance that with individual, like how to be with people. So I studied both massage therapy and herbs. I did a course in that, and then I paid back that, and then as a body worker, and I began working with trauma in that field. Put myself through school to get for somatic psychology and dance movement therapy, because I wanted to bring to that more collective health for all, well-being for all framework. How do I sit with a person? How do I work with people who are really suffering? And I wanted to keep it international. So my thesis, actually, for my degree in dance movement therapy, was on my form of dance that is Haitian dance. So I tried ballet, wasn't my body, tried modern dance for years and years and years and years and years. I was okay, but I loved to dance. So I just kept taking dance classes. And literally, it was in a Dunham technique class in New York City, where, unbeknownst to me, Catherine Dunham was watching. I didn't know it was her. And she called me over after class and she said, you should do traditional Haitian. That's what's in your body. And I did. And it was just right there. It was a love affair. So that's what I do. And so I went to Haiti and looked at dance movement therapy and Vodou, which is their spiritual practice, which is very misunderstood and maligned by, the Western Christian, all of that. I looked at that and social trauma, and I worked with street kids, and or children on the street, and I actually lived with them. I lived in a home where they were, and participated in a school that, a wonderful man had set up out of his home. He just ran a school because so many kids there can't afford to go to school. And I worked with them in dance. We had basically called them dance classes, but it was a therapeutic exchange. So that's what I looked at. And It's very humbling because, here I was, coming from the United States, white skin, I'm mixed ethnicity, but I'm, white skinned, sharing dance. I didn't teach Haitian dance. I taught some of the dances that I knew. Some of them were West African, and then they would teach Haitian, and then we would pause and talk about what we felt and everything, and then we would play more with movement creatively. I had a little measure that because I was a research I created and people's ability to approach and withdraw. It was based on a lot of somatic experiencing concepts and somatic. So it's very interesting, but it was, it was quite humbling because then it was like, I think that's part of what I was already attuned to, colonialism, the very colonial nature of humanitarian work. Like I was trying to get underneath that. And I realized the challenges in that because, I show up who I am and bring with me all of that history. And it was really hard for the kids not to look at me as the expert. Because they're so used to people coming in. And this is what's interesting. For my PhD, I called it a non-colonial approach. I guess the current term would be a decolonized.
Yeah.
I didn't, that term wasn't flying around as much then, but approach to training of trainers in humanitarian context. So I did the research in Sudan and Chad because where I was working with the Darfur conflict. And I actually worked with a colleague and we had funding from the US government, the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, and they wanted a very particular, everything was outlined what they wanted in this training for staff care, for, staff support, which is organizational self-care, and we, because of the spirit of who we are, but also because of my research, intentionally designed a training that was sourcing local resilience and brilliance. It was not us coming in and teaching concepts. It was conversations. And the first day the participants were furious at us because they were like, okay, you're here, like in 5 days, we're going to be experts, right? And we were like, well, you're already experts. And they're like, no, we're not. You're the experts. You're here to teach us. You're going to tell us exactly what to do. We said, no.
Wow.
And they were furious and they were like, but this is what they literally said, this is what the, the white people do when you come here. This is what the Europeans, and we were like, well, we're not going to do that because we don't live here. And this conflict, we know it from the news. And by the end of 5 days, it was quite powerful. But it took a bit of work, but it was, unfortunately, I couldn't really finish the research adequately because we couldn't get back into Darfur because the funding got pulled and, and there's the oppressive colonization right there. You're at the mercy of who's funding you. And Darfur is a place I could just go to on my own. You couldn't get in. So I wasn't able to do it as thoroughly as I wanted. But those are the kinds of things that I looked at is, I've always been fascinated in what is local culture, local intelligence. And I think since I was a little girl, I've been a decolonizer. I mean, it's just, I just have.
Just in you since day one. Yeah.
My dad recognized it. He said the minute I was born, he's like, you.
She's a revolutionary in the soul, like just willing to shake the structure and add something like a new perspective maybe. And I can imagine how funding someone who's so revolutionary in the approach is difficult for their own safety. But yeah, I appreciate the humbleness and the openness as well, just to be like, hey, I'm a human being, especially, and I'm white, and we are together and we can co-create and elaborate the process together. And how shocking it may have been for them, that's very relevant in terms of just realizing how colonialism is everywhere and inherent just because white people are arriving somewhere. It's just a package, like it's attached to being in this situation. So that's very impactful, and I'm moved to learn that from you. I'm just impressed that you could offer them a new understanding and a new option, really, and a new choice, again, a new empowerment to, that's the way they do it, but now we are changing the game and changing the rules, and we can do in another way. So that's very beautiful and life-changing, I guess, for them as well.
Well, the offering comes from listening. And I remember the first time I did that, I was in the Peace Corps between college and getting my public health degree. And I almost got kicked out of the Peace Corps because the director of the program I was in, he was doing his PhD and he was doing a nutrition survey. And he basically wanted all of the nutrition volunteers to go house to house and do these survey questions. It had nothing to do with what was needed in Guatemala. It was his thesis research. But I refused to do it. And I would just go to the market every day and talk to people, and I'd hang out in the post office. And they got mad and they're like, "You're not doing anything." And I said, "I'm listening." And, you know, and I said, "I'm going to do this for 6 months. I'm going to let people get to know me. I just moved into this community. I was in an indigenous community. And then when I started really going for projects, you know, people came to me with ideas, you know, they're like, "Oh, we want to do this. We want to do this. You talked about this," you know, and then boom, I mean, I was busy for 18 months. I won an award for all my projects. And I was like, you know, beautiful. And that did better. It was like, I listened. That's all I did. You know, I didn't go in. And so it's, you know, an offering that comes out of listening, I think is how I would describe it. That's really
receiving and giving. Not just imposing your way of seeing the world and just like, I'm right and you're nothing, and you're, you know, you have to learn from me because I'm the expert and the knowing. And well,
but it begins with the question of, am I even needed? People have often approached me like the Haiti earthquake, or you know, I have a little nonprofit that I fund projects through, and people say, you know, "I want to go with you." You know, I get all these, you know, I do this. It's often somatic people. I do this practice. I do that practice. I want to bring it. And I said, "Who there invited you? And what you know about the local culture?" I don't go anywhere I'm not invited.
Beautiful. I love the question. And do you have any answer to that? Like, are we needed there? It depends, I guess. It depends if you are called and if there are any you know, international projects, and if it's just going there and again showing that we know when they don't. I love that. And I'm curious about what fascinates you that much. Well, I have two questions that comes to mind, but maybe first, what fascinates you that much in dance movement therapy? Like, what just drives you since the moment that you got trained and that you discovered dance, and maybe what's the impact that you see, or I don't know, like I'm not willing to project any result, but what fascinates you in that?
You know, I think I knew about dance therapy when I was looking for the thing that I wanted to do that was good. I'm going to say more, you know, working, I mean, individually. It isn't just individually, you know, it can be families and couples and communities, but just something that was more less broad stroke than public health. I looked at a lot of things: acupuncture, I looked at going to med school, clinical psychology, dance therapy. I was looking at a bunch of different things. And it's a little bit romantic, but I was in Rwanda as a public health person right after the genocide. And I've told this story a few times, and I had a particularly grueling and terrifying trip to a community where we were to do an assessment. And you know, there's a lot of checkpoints. I mean, right after the genocide, there's always that period where it's like, who's in charge? Lots of checkpoints, lots of landmines, and we, unfortunately, the person I was working with was what I kind of like a Rambo, the kind of people that show up in humanitarian work who shouldn't be there. They're very irresponsible, and I mean, there's a bit of macho in it, like it was just
like showing up or
disregarding. And you know, we drove through checkpoints, and we were driving on these narrow tracks, you know, that there were minefield signs everywhere, and he was driving really fast and crazy, and he shouldn't have been in the work anymore. But he got there, and I remember I was just like, oh, I don't want to go back. Like, I don't want to go back. You know, when we went back in the dark, you weren't supposed to go back in the dark, like all these things. But we got to this little community, and these kids, there was only children there, and they picked up, there was a couple like instruments laying around, and they picked up some shards of, there was some cans and stuff, and they did this welcome song and dance. And I just remember I had an interpreter with me because I didn't speak Kirundi or any of the languages at all, Swahili, and she just said, "That's a welcome song and dance." And there were only children left. All the adults had been massacred. There were a few who were very, very ill, who were literally dying in the health clinic. They were just there, and they were so grateful to see us show up. and it's interesting because here it was my local, beautiful interpreter, myself in the way that I present, and then this macho guy. And then we were with one other guy who was amazing from the UN, who was one of my teachers in this work. He was very tuned in. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, dance movement therapy. It was a little bit naive and romantic, but it was boom. Like I was like, I literally saw Naropa's doors because I'd been there. I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And so I had this naive, romantic idea that this would be more accessible than clinical psychology, which it is. It's a whole different track than medicine. Medicine is really useful. I just, chose not to go that route. Still interested in acupuncture. I don't think I'll do it. So that's what I chose. And of course, the minute I started it, and I was, the thread that I was tuned into is dance is universal. Well, it is. And different cultures have different ways of expressing and different willingnesses and willingnesses to share. And I say that with deep respect for that. We don't, just because we show up at a place, we don't have a right to their dance. It's just like, are we invited? So I like to say dance movement therapy is one stream in an ocean of all the ways dance is healing. And each, whether it's belly dancing or Haitian, like respect for each form and how that is born of particular bodies and experiences. I don't have the experience of Haitian dance. My ancestors were not enslaved. They were not brought over on those in the Middle Passage. Those dances reflect, deep roots. And I was invited in, and then when I went to Haiti, I was invited in very deeply. So I danced those dances very respectfully. So dance movement therapy, I think what it's taught me is that it's rooted in Western psychotherapy, very much. The people who are referred to as the originators of it are 5 women who are Western European American. And I'm always quick to point out, well, they're the originators of that thin thread that we call US-based dance movement therapy. And they drew from Asian dance forms. I know in some of the old writing, they call it Oriental, which is very disrespectful, right? They drew from different dance forms. But I think in dance movement therapy, there is a place, like respectfully, where we can respectfully touch into what's universal, what's shared, dance. And I always say, no movement begins with a breath and dance begins with movement. So, people go, oh, dance movement therapy, do I have to,
perform? Yeah.
Anything. Balanced breathing, what we started with, is dance movement therapy. Just, taking a couple breaths may not be dance movement therapy, but that can go into movement. But by balancing our breathing and connecting it to the way that it drops down, rises up, melts us, we're connecting to movement. And that's the spirit of dance, right? So therapy is a dance, right? I look at it as a dance of reciprocity, right? I mean, when people come to me, we're always dancing. And I also feel like in dance, it helps me with this. I mean, there's certainly in the dance world and some of the, extremities of like ballet and some of the forms where people, I'm sure there have been, what do you call it? People who like direct dance troupes, like, choreographers. I mean, I've seen films, people who are really strict. But in the true spirit of dance, when we connect with people and share movement, there's an ability to really meet, I think, at a breath, soul, heart level that's very unifying. Not miraculous, but in the moment it might offer somebody who's felt very isolated and alone a moment of shared experience. I, as somebody who, again, working in the very multicultural context that I do, I often invite people to share, if they're interested in dance and are willing to share about their traditional or cultural dance, and sometimes they'll want to teach me, and if they want to, I'll learn very willingly. But just to talk about it, and that's I don't know, it's like the breath of humanity when we start to
breath of humanity, beautiful.
So,
yeah
but that's kind of how I, again, it was really not even, but pure-hearted, and I've learned a lot. I mean, what I teach, I always say, is what I teach is all the ways I've adjusted a framework that was essentially Western psychotherapy. It's how I like to say, I get Angwin St. Just said that, used to say that, she's one of my teachers: show up, shut up, and get what's going on. And that's what I do. And so how I bring dance in, it's listening. It's that listening, so that the offering comes from that. So dance is a beautiful, lot of beautiful possibilities for doing that.
Yeah, I love that. Show up, shut up, and just facilitate the space. And through your presence, it can
Yeah.
be just enough. And I had like a few words like gathering, and when you were sharing the story and this wild adventure towards the children, and just welcoming and reuniting, and kind of, yeah, going beyond also skin color, age, body form, body shape, body size, whatever, and origins, and just coming back to the roots of aliveness. That's the term that came often, like just aliveness of a breath that leads to maybe a movement. And we don't need to, as you said, like learn many strict movement and choreographies to do movement and dance therapy. So it's not about aligning with a strict movement or a line or a direction. It's more about letting things happen and being with them. And so it leads us maybe to, I don't know, memories or sensation or anything that is there. But it's like what I understand, and you'll tell me if it's that division that you have, but like dance being a vehicle for healing to happen, or even where's the limit, I don't know, but like dance and healing being one thing at once. And because we spend time with the presence and listening and co-regulation as well, then we allow the natural process to arise. And that's beautiful.
Yeah. I would say healing and change and restoration. Connection, all of it. Dance is definitely, as are other things, as is music and poetry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I'm also, it's not the only thing. I'm wary of the tendency in this, I've run into this where it's like, this is the thing that works, or not everything works for everybody. So.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I can imagine in group or individual sessions as well, the impact may be different, or the discomfort as well, maybe more or less present. And as you mentioned, every country or culture has their own relationship to movement or body, and maybe different levels of shame as well, or acceptance of just moving freely. And well, maybe I guess in France, maybe I'm biased, but I believe that it's not that easy to welcome everyone and dance, in a public space. And wow, it may feel triggering for many people, and maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I am, but it may be very different in various for many times as well. So during COVID, for example, it was so needed and essential, and it appeared essential to us again as a culture to dance and to be outside and to come as different generations, and to just let go of like the conditioning, like you have to sit straight and look a certain way, and like, well, we don't give a shit, like just do it and have fun. And it felt so freeing, and it was so eye-opening, really, like, hey, the government thought it wasn't necessary to do sport or dance or anything. Well, people wasn't agreeing at all, so we just did it anyway. So it was very beautiful to kind of install this a revolutionary approach as well to what it means to be together. So yeah, I love dance being this gathering movement. That's beautiful.
I love what you just said. That's beautiful. Yeah. Outrageously beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was curious about talking about colonialism and deconstructing colonialism or decolonizing. What's your approach about, like, what are your tools maybe about really acknowledging the traditional culture, honoring them, but also acknowledging that we can be in a white body, and how where is the line between being in a new country and colonizing, like it's fragile, I feel.
It is. That's a really provocative question. Again, I think, in the past, I'm absolutely certain that I showed up I'll focus on humanitarian context, with an NGO, mostly European or American, mostly white, not always all white bodies, but I mean, that's, I started, way back when, but I think what I've learned through the years, but I'm even reflecting, Peace Corps was one of my first experiences, and I pushed back then and just listened, and I don't really know where that came. I don't know why. I mean, I think that was something intuitive in me. That was just me. But over the years, I mean, again, only going where I'm invited. I think, that's a way that if I were to put it in some of the more modern language, that's a way that I practice humility, cultural humility, and I'm going to call it international humility, only going where I'm invited. So there's already an opening there. I mean, people see who I am, they know who I am, they've seen a picture of me, or they've, often I get invited because somebody comes to a workshop in Istanbul and they want me to go to Beirut, and, those kinds of things. So they know who I am. But I'm also pretty honest. I mean, I name it, and I can't think of a specific example, but I name it. I name, I don't go on and on, because I think that's not helpful to, when I've heard people go on, I'm going to call it in a white fragility way about, privilege, but I name it. I name that I have the ability to leave. I mean, I've been evacuated. I remember being evacuated from Haiti when I was there during one of the really violent episodes, and I didn't want to leave. And when the ambassador found out, they pulled me out. He brought me back because I was running the program for victims of violence. He said, she needs to be here. But I remember being in a line. It was mostly expats, foreign people. In Haiti, the term is blanc, which means white, but it also means foreigner. And Haitians just crying to get out, but they couldn't get on the planes, so that disparity, that blatant inequity. So I name those things, I name that I come from a country. I name that this is not my experience. I don't ever say, I know how you feel, or yes, I understand, because I don't. What an insult to somebody who's had a very different experience than I have. So I name things, I'm honest. But I think I do that I think I'm very conscious of timing. I think there's a right time, and it's not a formula. I don't gush everything out initially. I allow people to ask me a lot of questions and get to know me. I think that's part of the listening. I love to learn about culture. So I ask a lot of questions. I think sometimes I'm ridiculous. I ask so many questions, and, there's a balance between burdening people and being open to hearing. And the truth is, we do have expertise. Like when I've been invited in, or even before when I've gone on, program, like worked for one of the big NGOs and gone in, often people get really excited when they realize what I offer, and they are interested in the expertise. And I've had the, amazing benefit of the training. As I said, the privilege of training to be a yoga teacher, training to be a dance movement therapist, training to be a somatic psychotherapist. So I also recognize I do have that wisdom and knowledge, and I can show up with that. Expertise really means that you're in deep relationship with learning about something. So I can show up with that and hold that place. And my being curious about culture is inviting the people I'm working with to also hold that place. So we all have knowledge about something. So it's kind of owning it and leaving space for everybody to own it. Yeah. I mean, and I know you asked specifically about culture, but I just,
that's beautiful. The horizontal vision of being in learning and giving and receiving process again. And also naming. I appreciate the courage, I guess, and the honesty it requires as well to name things and talk about things and be together in the unknowing as well, or in the acknowledgement that just shit happens and that's a reality. And just the honesty of being human in this vast society that we live in, and that's beautiful. So I really appreciate the humbleness that it inspires me. Like the openness and humbleness. Totally.
I've had great teachers.
And I appreciate it as well. Like, I am a teacher, and I am and was a student as well. So it's always both and how tremendously complicated it may feel sometimes to be with both complexities and dualities, and sides of one coin, really. Like, I am a teacher now, so I have to be perfect, and like maybe a lot of pressure and pressure on ourselves and on others as well, to just obey and do what we say, because we know, well, okay, but remember that a few years ago you were a student as well. So like, just look back and look through the people that you see as well. And yeah, that's very human based. And I'm not surprised regarding your work. So human is just central to your work. So I appreciate that really very much. I think it's needed in, in times of, I guess, crisis, I would say, and human crisis really. And climate crisis is deeply, to me, rooted into what we feel being human is. And the calling to return to nature, and the acknowledgement that we kind of destroyed a little bit of it. So yeah,
A
it's
lot of
a
it.
yeah. I know I didn't want it to say it, but yeah, definitely naming it. So true. So it's, wow, it's needed, to place the human not back to center, but back to where we can be as a whole, like in togetherness, in humbleness and co-creation. And that's so important. So really, mm, mm. And yeah.
No, I'm just thinking, yeah, that there's a path there, that, yeah. I
Mm,
mean, as I'm listening to you, I'm just thinking about the paths, and I'm really, very passionate. My mom, she died in 2021, and I remember in some of our last conversations, she said, "You've always loved the animals." She was,
mm,
reminding me of things that I sort of remembered about being a little girl,
mm.
and I do. And I was just this morning, I had to go out early because my car died, so I had to pick up a rental car. So I have a car for a few days.
Okay.
Um, and I was just watching all the people in cars and concrete, and there's so much construction going on in many places in the US. And I was on the
Mm,
plane the other day with somebody, and I don't remember what we were talking about, but it got into a conversation about land and,
mm,
expansion, and I think growth in Santa
mm,
Fe. And, she was like, "Oh, well, yeah, there's so much land, there's plenty." And I said, "No, there's not. There absolutely is not enough land."
mm,
I said, "We share it with animals." And I could see right away, she was like, "Oh, they find a place." I said, "No, they don't. So they
mm,
get killed on highways. They start eating people's pets. They die horrible deaths. They starve."
mm,
And at first she was like this, and then she started asking me questions. And I think by the end of the flight, it was about a 2-hour flight, she's like, I'm going to think about that when I go home, because I've noticed some changes in, things, everything from mosquitoes to, I think,
mm,
frogs where she lived. And I'm like, there's not enough land, and it's, balanced breathing, right? What's the most
mm,
macro cosmic balanced breath is we inhale the gifts of every evolutionary ancestor we've ever had, and they have 4 legs, and they have claws, or they have little padded feet, or they have tails, right? I mean, we
mm,
inhale that and we exhale, and there's an exchange,
mm,
oxygen and
mm.
carbon dioxide and all the ways that we exchange. But we didn't get here alone.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
body remembers having a tail and having our belly on the earth. And so, yeah, I'm getting more and more interested in contributing, to that particular, to the climate crisis. And,
Mm.
trying to figure out how to do that as somebody who's been working with people. But
Yeah, who can be victim of climate disasters, but also are part of a land and a landscape and a land culture, really. So an ecosystem, and as tiny it may be, but also as large as a planet. So micro and micro again. So yeah, totally. Yeah, that's so important. And I appreciate that you can weave and combine activism and therapy that sometimes can be divided. And I
yeah,
just
yeah.
don't really get why. I don't know. Like, I have a brain that just always sees like the communalities, and I'm like, well, we should do all at once, but it doesn't exist. So I don't know. Well, at least in France. So I'm like, well, you have to be an activist in one side and then study psychology in another, and you are a dancer, but well, I can be all of it or not really. Well, you are. So I appreciate that as well, to like the space that you've allowed yourself to hold for yourself, to just gather all the pieces and weave your career and your journey around all of them, like not ignoring one because it's not on the program, on the degree program.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's encouraging as well, I guess, for maybe listeners or new generations as well. Like, what do I want to do? Is there a specific degree that I want to study or follow? Well, listen to your heart as well, and what
Yep.
ignites the fire in you and the interests, and just go for it, explore. And I can imagine that you have plenty of stories of adventures and unexpected adventures, I guess, during
Yeah.
your travels. And yeah, that's also beautiful to let that happen again.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. And talking about trainings and workshops, I'm curious if you have anything coming up soon or ongoing, maybe that you want to share with the
Yeah.
audience. Mm.
Sure. I have, well, coming up very soon, I have, this year is full, but I'm offering two next year, Dancing the Wild Home. It's
Mm.
I could put the words eco-somatic, eco-dance retreat. I'll put those words on it because it helps people orient towards what it is.
Mm.
We work with movement, mostly drawing from continuum, but I also draw from myself as yoga teacher and dancer and dance movement therapist, sacred dance.
Mm.
In on the island of Tonga, and we spend time doing that, and we spend time in the ocean with humpback whales, and very, very mindfully. And it's not an adventure trip like, oh, cool, let's go, be with whales. I invite participants to become more intimate with the ocean,
Mm.
because without her, we're nothing, we're gone.
Yeah.
I invite them to open their hearts to the deep wisdom of our marine mammal ancestors. Tremendous wisdom and compassion there. It's really about making a commitment to honoring and loving and dedicating some time to ocean preservation. So it's increasingly more of a almost, regenerative activism
Mm.
retreat, like it's very regenerating, restorative, but it's also sparking that fire. So that's coming up in August. But it's Dancing the Wild Home, and in September I will have next year's retreats on my website, which is ambergray.com.
Yeah.
In October, it's October 27th to 29th, I'll be teaching in Belgium at Agape, AGAPE. A polyvagal informed somatic and dance movement therapy. That's a 3-day. And I know in 2024, we're going to do a 4-day one where I expand it and bring more of spirit in, and we get even a little wilder than I usually get. What else do I have coming up? I'm actually working on some stuff in Australia, New Zealand for the end of the year. I know there's more, but I can't think of it right now. But
And I've heard about a book. I don't know, how is
yes,
it going, but I've heard about that.
it's been, unfortunately, it's been quite delayed. I was sent the contract for the book the day that my mother's doctor called and said, your mom's dying, you need to come now. So it was like both of those. And I didn't think about it. And then my dad died 2 months later. And I remember right after he died, the publisher called me and said, do you think you can have the book done in a year? And I was numb, and I said, yes. And then I never thought about it because I was in this deep grief. So I'm writing it now. It's going slowly. I mean, I mentioned to you that, I just had some surgery. So there was about, really, it's only in the last 3 weeks that I can sit on a normal chair at a computer. This is great. I can stand up now because I like to stand up. That's just come back. So, and along with surgery comes painkillers, which are not good for writing. I wrote some things and I thought, whoa.
Like, can be creative, but I'm not sure.
It was, I don't know, it was silly. Anyways, yeah, but it's coming along.
Beautiful. Well,
I'm
you have
writing it.
one buyer for sure. I will be there. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I'm curious about the Belgium workshop or training. Is it open to every or anybody, or is it really for clinicians or?
Everybody. No, I like everybody workshops. Yeah, it's my clinical experience informs it, but it's very much it's creative. It's last year we had body workers and physiotherapists, and everybody got something out of it. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a really fun one. It'll be on my website.
Yeah, we'll look everything in the show note for sure, with pleasure. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, it's already the time. It's going so fast, but I'm very pleased to have had this conversation with you, and I'm just taking, I don't know, maybe the term like hope and aliveness. That's really what sticks with me. Yeah, kind of like just go for it. That's the sense that I have after listening to your a tiny bit of your journey and how you impact the world, really, which is something really close to me as well. And like, how do we contribute to this planetary ecosystem that we are, and how do we reclaim really the wholeness inside of us and together? So that's really inspiring to me. So just thank you for sharing openly and sharing your wisdoms and insights. It's very helpful.
Thank you for inviting me.
Mm.
It's like I'm excited. I feel like I have a kindred spirit in
Mm.
France now. A kindred spirit.
Yeah, you're so
Yeah,
welcome. I would be so pleased. And in Europe, I mean, it's not that far. So yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for
really
being
fun.
here. And yeah, look forward for our next episode together.
Yeah. Take good care.
Yeah, thank you.